All throughout magazines, and I don't know if you still read magazines or if they're even a thing anymore, but even our social media feed, there are these advertisements for you to get away somewhere. It might look like something like this, a picture of a beach. The beach is calling, right? Like, oh man, if I could just go there right now in the sunny Florida, the best state in the country, you could just have a great time. All the Texans, you're supposed to get mad at that, right? But maybe for you, it's not the beach. Maybe you hear about the beach and you're like, I don't like the sand. Sand gets everywhere. It's just frustrating. Nobody's happy, because if you've ever seen a dad on vacation at the beach, the dad's never happy, right? They're always carrying like 15 chairs and they're going down the beach and they're frustrated and they're tripping. Their kids are running towards the water and you're like, riptide, and you're doing all the things, right? Maybe for you, this is what's calling, the mountains. Whew. So I'm a beach guy, but I have learned to really, really, really love the mountains. There's something about that mountain air that just, there's no Houston smog, right? But this is a picture of what we see in our social media feeds, right? What are they selling when you see ads like this? Rest. They're selling rest, right? You get away from your normal life, get away from the crazy, get away from the work and the responsibility, and come sit on the beach and do nothing. It's the thing that they're selling. We know that vacations take work. Sometimes they take a lot of work. If you have younger kids, you know that sometimes vacations don't really feel like a vacation. Any parents in the room? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? You get back from your vacation, you're like, okay, now they need to go to school because mommy and daddy need a vacation now. In the human world, we call it rest or a break, but what they're really selling is Sabbath. Sabbath. The Hebrew word for Sabbath is Shabbat, and it means simply to stop. Stop. Stop what you're doing and don't do anything, right? Rest, relax, recover. That's the idea of what Sabbath is in the Hebrew Shabbat. There's an instinctive longing inside of each one of us for that kind of rest. You're probably thinking about it. You saw the picture of that beach and you're just like, oh, if I could just go there this next week, that would be awesome. We find ourselves longing for this break, and I think we all do that, and we've been running so hard. I just need this break. I need this relaxation. But today, as we get into the meat of this series, the patterns of Jesus, what we're going to focus on is Sabbathing and resting. And this is intentional, because for some of you, you heard about this spiritual discipline series that we're doing, and you're like, great, you got your notepad out, and you're ready to take notes. Tell me what I need to do and when I need to do it, and I'm going to do it. And the point of today is that the first discipline that we're going to talk about is where you do nothing. Because this is one of those that we don't like to talk about. We kind of avoid many times. But this is less about what we need to do and more about who we need to trust. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30 says this: "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What a beautiful passage of scripture. Now, I'm going to read this out of the Message translation, but I want to give a disclaimer here. The Message translation is helpful for seeing a different perspective. I don't encourage that to be your everyday Bible. It's not a study Bible. Don't utilize it as that. It's a paraphrase Bible is really what it is. And so it can be helpful. And I love the way that Eugene Peterson worded this part of the passage in chapter 11, verse 28. And he says, "Are you tired? Are you worn out? Burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life." It's like, that sounds awesome. I want that. "I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly." I love how this is described here, this idea of are you tired? This has become a rhetorical question in our culture, hasn't it? If I was to ask you, who's tired this morning, I bet there would be a good chunk of our hands that would raise up, right? Some of you woke up and you're like, immediately, I've got to go to the coffee pot. And then as you're drinking that coffee, you're thinking, ooh, I get to have another one at church because I'm exhausted. We talked about this a little bit last week with the yoke, and I want to show you this picture again. This picture is a farming tool where they would tie two oxen together for farming and tilling the land. But for a rabbi, the yoke was his set of teaching. It was a way that he carried around his yoke with him, his way of life, his way of teaching, and they would say, take my yoke upon you and learn. And what does Jesus say? What is he offering us here? He's saying to these people that have been so bogged down by the laws, all 613 laws in the Old Testament, and he says, come to me. I want to give you rest. Are you tired? The rhetorical question again. There's old saying that we used to say when we had a busy season, we're burning the candle at both ends. John Mark Comer says it this way, is that our new normal is low-grade exhaustion. That we have learned in our modern world to live with just being exhausted. Some of you really know what that's like, right? You feel like there's never a break. You feel like there's never a rest. And when you do get a rest, it's not nearly long enough and it's not nearly good enough. We live tired. There's no margin in our schedules. In the hustle and busy culture that we live in, it's what we've become accustomed to. And so what's one of the first things that goes to the back burner when we are living in our life with no margin is rest. Instead of giving up other things, right? What do? We're like, well, I'll just sleep a little bit less. I'll rest a little bit less. And I'll go to bed a little bit later, and I got to wake up a little bit earlier because I can't get it all into one day. James Moss, author, notes that prior to the light bulb being invented, the average American slept 10 hours a night. 10 hours. Could you imagine that life? That sounds great, doesn't it? Now it's like we're scratching and clawing to get 6 hours in a night. And we're like, whoo, got a full 6 hours. It's amazing to me how much we know about sleep, yet we ignore it. Y'all didn't come for this message today, did you? So I have this ring on my finger, little shiny one. It's called an Oura ring. It's not witchcraft or magic, but you put it on, and it tells you about your sleeping. Lindsay and I got him about a year ago or so, and I wasn't sleeping very well. And what I mean by not sleeping very well is we would stay up too late watching a show on Netflix, and then we'd be like, I'm just not sleeping great. Anybody else been there? You wake up, gosh, why am I so tired? It's because you pushed the continue watching button. And so we started to pay attention more to our sleeping, right? You wake up in the morning and you pull up the Oura app and you're like, what's my sleep score? This is a horrible thing for a competitive person because now I'm like, let's just go to bed now, 7 o'clock, I'm gonna get a good score. But it's not just sleep, right? Our phones never stop buzzing. They're always going off, right? Sit it on the counter trying to be present, and you're like, you ever have that feeling where your phone's buzzing, you're talking to someone in your family, and you're like, I'm trying to keep really good focus here, because my phone's buzzing. News is always at our fingertips. Politics never sleeps. You remember when we used to have a political season? That was a good time, wasn't it? It's all the time now. It's no wonder why we're exhausted. And here's what I would tell you. It's not that we're just exhausted, and not that we're just tired. We are tired at a soul level. Our souls are tired. We're weary. Now here's what may not be popular in our modern world, but it's true, is that this is a spiritual problem. Being tired, being exhausted, living like this is a spiritual problem. Matthew chapter 22, verse 35 through 40. What's wrong with being tired all the time? That doesn't sound like a spiritual problem, does it? Well, let's see. And one of them, a lawyer, asked Jesus this question to test him, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and prophets. Love God, obey God, right? This is what, if we love something, we do what they ask, right? And so obedience towards God and his call, that's loving the Lord, like obeying the commands that he's given us, not to be in legalism, but to strive towards righteousness and holiness through the power of the Spirit. That's to love God. But then he says to love others as well. All 613 laws hang on these two commands. And if loving our neighbor well is a part of the greatest commandment, here's the reason why Sabbathing and having a rhythm of Sabbath in our life is important. It is hard to love people well when you're exhausted. Think about it. Is it not hard to love people well when you're exhausted? You might even find yourself in your home where you're short with your spouse. I know that y'all never do that, but you might every once in a while be short with your spouse or frustrated or agitated at your kids, and you're frustrated at your coworkers, and then you kind of look around and you're like, why am I so frustrated? Oh, I'm tired. Most of our modern world, we're living exhausted lives, and it's hard to bear the fruit of the Spirit when we live in a state of tiredness. Mark chapter 4, verse 19 says it this way: but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word and proves unfruitful. It proves unfruitful. This verse is given in the parable of the sower, where Jesus is talking about the sower is throwing out the seed. Some of it lands on good soil, some of it lands on bad soil. You know, that's the idea behind what Jesus is saying here. But what is it that keeps many from living in this state where God's word is sown and it falls on rich soil of our hearts? Exhaustion, tiredness, living frustrated because of our exhaustion. And why are we doing those things? Many times it's for the cares of the world, isn't it? The deceitfulness of riches. If I could just have a little bit more. Now, is it bad to have breathing room in your finances? No. Is it bad to have financial wealth? No, that's not what we're saying. But we are saying is if you are pursuing something and sacrificing a command of God for the pursuit of something of this world, that's when it becomes a problem. And so I think we have to ask ourselves these questions. Be willing to be honest with our own hearts and our own souls and say, am I placing this command of God on the back burner for the pursuit of something that is the deceitfulness of riches? But it's not just loving others. It's with this level of exhaustion. I think also in our own lives, what I've seen in my own life and what you've probably seen in your own life is that we are more prone to sin when we are exhausted. I want you to think with me for a moment, and not to bring judgment or shame on yourself, but think about the biggest mess-ups in your life, just for a moment. I would venture to say for many of them, they happened when we were tired and exhausted and we kind of let our guard down. And so if we were to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, obedience and trusting him with everything, that's hard to do when we're living exhausted. Scientists and researchers have been telling us that when we live with a lack of sleep, it affects the prefrontal cortex of our brain, which is where we get our decision-making from. So when you find yourself late at night, tired, you make a bad decision, you can probably guarantee it's because you're just exhausted and you're not thinking clearly. It's almost like we can see the reasons why we need to see the reasons why we aren't thriving spiritually, yet we don't make the changes. And here's what the scriptures are offering us. Jesus saying, stop. Stop. Find rest. Take my yoke upon you. It's easy. It's light. It's a better way for us to live. Let's turn in our Bibles to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2. Verses 1 through 3 says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them, and on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. And so God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy because on it, God rested from all his work that he had made and done in creation. I think one of the things that we leave out of the creation story many times is the Sabbath. We talk about the creation story, and we're like, look what God did. He spoke it all with his mouth, and boom, things just started happening that came to existence and to being, and it's exciting, and it's like we sometimes leave out that after 6 days, on the seventh day, God rested himself. He instituted it for us. So what happens with these parts of the Bible is we tend to find reasons why we can't rest. And some of you in here today, as I've been going through this message already, you've been making a list in your mind of reasons why you can't Sabbath. I'm type A. I can't rest. I am important. Resting is for lazy people. I wish I would have had this in my pocket when I was a little kid with my parents. That would have been great. Resting's not lazy, Dad. It's spiritual. You might be saying, I run a business. People are counting on me. The list can go on and on and on, right? But I think for us, I can even find myself in this list. And there may be truth in those statements, but God set this rhythm up for us for a purpose, for a reason. That we were not meant to burn the candle at both ends, to work 7 days a week, to live our lives exhausted and wondering why we're not thriving spiritually in our walk with Jesus. During the French Revolution in 1793, they weren't getting enough done in their country, evidently, and so they decided to take from a 7-day work week and make it a 10-day work week. That sounds awful, doesn't it? They weren't getting enough done. We need to be more productive. We need to get more done in our nation. We gotta get this stuff out to the world. And so it's 10 days a week. They created 3 days. I don't know how you do that. They couldn't add hours to the day, so they just made more days, but they did it. And what they found as they expanded and they added these 3 days to 10 days, they found that productivity was down at an all-time low. They also found that suicide and mental health was at an all-time high. Why? They're exhausted. They're tired. They're agitated. They're frustrated with the state of their life. What we're seeing today in our culture is a modern attempt at the French Revolution, to where it says, you don't get to take a day off. Because if you take a day off, then everything around you is going to crumble. How many's ever felt that pressure before? If I take a day off, if I rest, if I'm not responding to an email immediately or text message and doing the things that I need to do, if I don't do it right now, then this whole company is going to fail. We wouldn't say that, but that's really what we feel inside. When we live without a rhythm of Sabbath, we're going against the rhythm that God has set up for us. So if you're taking notes, you can write this down. When we choose not to Sabbath, we go with the rhythm of the world and we reject the rhythm of God. Recently, researchers have been studying a lot about Sabbathing and resting well, and we know all the research about sleep. I mean, that's pretty important. But they studied this group in California that took a very consistent Sabbath 1 day a week for an extended time of their life. And one of the doctors of this study said, not only is this group of people more happy by every measure that we could find of the other population around them, but they said that taking a Sabbath, that these people added a day to their life for every Sabbath day that they took. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Now, all of this is theory, right? The days of your life are numbered. The Lord is going to take you when it's his time. We don't get to add or subtract to our day. But would we all not in this room, would we not want to be happy, have more joy, have more rest, add quality of life to the numbers of our days? Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So what's keeping us from it? Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. This is the Ten Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and he made it holy. A few years ago, I think it was 2016, I was in Israel on a church trip, one of the expeditions you go, just kind of see the Holy Land. And they intentionally put us in Jerusalem on Friday evening. The way that the Jewish calendar works is that the new day starts at night. So when the sun goes down, that's when the new day starts. So Friday evening, they're running around city. I remember walking through Jerusalem, and you start seeing people running across the city. Like, what in the world is going on? What did I miss? Did I not see something? And it eventually dawned on me. All these people are running around the city, taking care of everything they need to, because they're about to go take their Sabbath, and they're not allowed to do any work that next day. You start seeing the shops close. You start seeing a whole new way of life. Now, I'm not saying we need to be legalistic, but I am saying there's something to what God has called us to do in this idea of Sabbathing. It's not just for health benefits, but it's seen as a command from God. Did you know that the command to keep the Sabbath is the longest of all the 10 commandments in Exodus? Think about that for a moment. In all the words that God gave us, God gave to Moses in the 10 commandments, he spent the majority of them, it's 37% actually, of the words of the 10 commandments are on the Sabbath. So let's think through these commands for a moment. Do not lie, do not steal, don't kill, don't have an affair, right? These are things that we know, we try to stay away from, and no one, unless they are just simply twisted in the mind, would brag on breaking these commands. I can almost guarantee you're not going to go to work tomorrow, and your coworker's not going to look at you and say, you wouldn't believe what I stole from my neighbor this weekend. They're not going to do that, are they? Your friend, they may come to you in confidence out of brokenness, but they're not going to come to you and say, well, I murdered my neighbor. It was a great weekend. How was yours? But we definitely brag about breaking the Sabbath, don't we? What it has become is we say, hey, how's it going? So busy, right? It's a badge of honor that we wear, isn't it? It's almost like we've equated our busyness to our importance in our world and our culture, and we've said, if people know that I am busy, then they know that I am important. We gotta look inwardly at this, people. We gotta look inwardly at this church and say, why am I so busy? Why am I so driven towards busyness and hurry and exhaustion? Is it for a social status, or am I not being disciplined in some areas? What if we decided to brag that we could rest because we know that it's all God's anyways? I think the reason that many of us don't practice Sabbath is because we're afraid to let go of control. Any control people in the room? Help me out here, because it's me. We're afraid to let go of control. We're afraid to hand the reins over to God, and if we're being honest, we're afraid if we miss a day of work, or if we don't respond to that thing or this thing, then it's all going to come crumbling down. And here's what I want to tell you. You're not nearly that important. That's encouraging, isn't it? It's going to be okay. Somebody else's emergency is not always your emergency. Somebody else's lack of planning is not always your priority to get done on that day. You know, that's easy, and y'all are thinking, well, Derek, you're your own boss. That's easy to say. I get it. But you can learn to have boundaries in your workplace, too. Y'all are going to have some great conversation with your spouse on the way home today. I promise. It's going to be great. See, honey? So let me give you a couple disclaimers. taking a Sabbath does not mean that we don't work hard. Doesn't mean that we're not hard workers. Doesn't mean that we don't. I really believe this. We should be the hardest working people in our workplace. We are to work at everything as if we're working for the Lord. We want to be hard workers, people of character, competence, right? Being light in the world in our workplace. That is a way that we do that. That is important. But it doesn't mean that we're lazy. And for some of you, you're going to hear this word Sabbath, and you're like, nah, I don't think I can do it. My dad just drilled it into me. Work, 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 work. What we are saying is, God, I'm following your rhythm for my life. I'm putting it in your hands. And so, are we willing to take that risk? Here's one of the questions I think that many of us are going to have today. Is taking a Sabbath a hard legal line that we need to obey? Like if we break the Sabbath, is God going to come down with a lightning bolt and strike our house and all the things, right? No. I don't believe it's something that we are new covenant believers. We are supposed to keep the Sabbath, in my opinion, but that doesn't mean that we have to do it from a legal standpoint. I don't believe that it's a command they have to obey to a T, but it's legally binding, but there's a lot of wisdom. I think so that we can be followers of Jesus, everyday followers of Jesus, so we can love God, so we can love people well, we need to learn to Sabbath. Mark chapter 2, and it's not going to be on the screen, but Jesus has this line where he says, the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. What we've done in our modern world is we've taken the not people for the Sabbath, and we're like, well, we're just not going to Sabbath. But the point of that is that the Pharisees had all these extra laws and rules and things they would, like, you need to do this, and you got to take care of that, and you got to make this happen and that happen, and all the things, right? You got to do it, and you got to do it to the best of your ability. And if you don't obey every little dot and jewel of the law, then you have just failed completely. What Jesus was trying to say is, yes, take the Sabbath, but that doesn't mean if your neighbor needs help to jump their car off, if your neighbor comes knock on your door and says, hey, can you jump my car off? Oh, sorry, I'm on Sabbath. It doesn't mean for the moms in the room, it doesn't mean that you can't take care of your children. For the dads in the room, it doesn't mean that you can't serve your family. It doesn't mean that we sit around lazy and not do anything all day. We live our life, but we take a break from the norm so that we can put our trust in Jesus and say, God, I know that you're the creator of the universe, and you hold it all together in your hands. In my life, I'm just a steward of what you've given me. What's a Sabbath? So let me give you this, and then we'll close. It's a 24-hour period where we take a rest and we stop from the norm. 24-hour period. You might be here and you think, wow, 24 hours? Are you serious right now? Like, there's no way I can't do that in my life. Here's what I would tell you. Is in full disclosure, I'm not preaching this message as someone that has it all figured out 100%. There's some weeks that I do really good with it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to work on my message on Friday. Because Friday is my Sabbath. You may text me on a Friday. Sometimes I might text back. Sometimes I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just going to take a break. Some people see that as rude. If you text me on another day and I don't respond, it's just because I opened it and forgot to reply. But I try to take a break on Fridays to where I'm not working on my message. Early on in our marriage, Lindsay would bring it up to me like, man, it's like anytime you're home, you're still working on something. Well, I got to get this email I got to get, that rush of like, got to do it. I tell this story because if you feel like 24 hours feels like a lifetime, start with 6 hours. Start with 8 hours. Go to 12. Work your way up to 24 hours to where you can say for 24 hours, I'm not going to work. I'm going to be disciplined. And next week, we're going to talk about what a Sabbath can look like, your day could look like, because it's not being lazy. It's not watching Netflix for 12 hours in a day or being on TikTok or Instagram. It's not that. It's a break from the norm. So, in verse 8 of the commandment, what does God say? Remember the Sabbath day. So what are we to remember? We remember that we serve a God that holds all things together. We remember that he is the creator of the universe, yet he rested as well. We remember that this life is not as dependent on me as I like to think that it is. And we remember that our identity is not in what we do, but it is who I am in Christ. John Mark Comer describes it beautifully when he says, Sabbath is a practice by which we undergo a dramatic shift from restlessness to restfulness. Listen to this. This is the from to idea. From hurry to peace. From busyness to margin. From burnout to sustainable pace. To noise to quiet. From distraction to clarity. From isolation to solitude. From crowds to community. And from grasping to gratitude. I don't know about you, but I look at that list and I'm like, I see a lot of myself on the left side of the page. Anybody else? But I desire to see myself on the right side of the page, where I can sit in quietness, where I can have clarity of mind, I can have margin in my schedule, I can have a sustainable pace, that I cannot grasp for things of this world, but I can be grateful for what the Lord has entrusted me with. And here's what we do. I'm closing, I promise. Here's what we do in our world. We work ourselves to death with no Sabbath, and then we take everything that we can and we put it into a 6 or 7 day trip called vacation, and we think that that's going to solve our exhaustion and our tiredness. And I want to challenge you with that. It's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough just to take a couple of days out of the year and say, you know what, we're gonna go somewhere and we're just gonna have fun as a family. Do that, yes, but don't make that your reliability on living less anxious or living less ungrateful or living less hurried. It's not gonna do it. It's about having a rhythm in our life and a discipline that says, I'm willing to trust Jesus in my rest. You should bow your heads with me.